What's going on, family? Welcome back to another week and another episode of Unscripted. And if you're watching this visually on YouTube, welcome back to another video. I'm your host, Akeem Haynes. Before we get into this week's special guest and I give him an introduction, if you could do us a huge favor, head over to Apple Podcasts or Apple iTunes and leave a rating or review of the podcast. That simple act would go a long way in moving the podcast forward. If you would like to leave a donation to the podcast, and you can do so in the show notes below by Patreon or through our PayPal account. I want to thank you again to our listeners for tuning in each and every single week. We appreciate you. So with that being said, let me introduce my special guest this week. So my guest this week is Coach Tom Higgins. Coach Tom Higgins is currently the defensive coordinator for the University of Alberta Golden Bears. But before that, he had an extensive career in the CFL, but before that, he was a player, and he's played 4 professional seasons with the Calgary Stampeders, the Buffalo Bills, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Shortly after his career ended playing as a player, he became a coach, and he started his coaching journey. Now, it took him 19 years to become a head coach, but once he became a head coach, he definitely made that time count. In 2001, he took over the head coaching position with the Edmonton Eskimos. 2 years later, he helped lead that team to a Grey Cup championship. Look, we talk about so many things in this episode. We talk about leadership, what it takes to be a great leader, mentorship, and all the lessons that his mentors taught him. We talk about work-life balance, his time playing, and some a pretty cool story about Walter Payton. You know, this is an episode that I think that you will truly enjoy. If you've been following Coach Tom Higgins for the entirety of his career, then this will be a great refresher. If you have not, this will be a great introduction to this man of principle and all the great wisdom that he shares on this episode. So without further ado, enjoy this week's episode with Coach Tom Higgins.
And I love the photo behind your right shoulder. Do you know the backstory of that photographer?
This one, no, but tell me, please.
Fascinating, because the photographer who got that photo got pushed out of the prime spot on the other side. And he was actually, I think, somewhat dejected that, you know what, he didn't get the side that all the other big-time photographers got. He got on the other side, and he's the one who got the photo. That is legendary.
Hey,
that photo is all over.
Sometimes you just have to be in the right spot. Sometimes you're in the wrong spot and it's the right time.
Exactly.
Coach, man, it is a pleasure to have you on today. I know we had a discussion earlier in the week, and as I was getting, kind of ready for this, it made me reflect back to the first conversation that we ever had. It was very brief. It was at Winsport there at the facility, and you came over. And you said, Akeem, Tom Higgins here. Nice to meet you. We have a lot in common, but I don't have a lot to say right now because you were in the midst of doing so many different things. And so it was just interesting reflecting and seeing on that time. But I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got a lot going on. And so I want to kind of go backwards before we go forwards. 2020, coaches, we touched about it earlier in this week. It's done a lot of different things for different people, right? But for you, how did you handle the uncertainty? How did you handle what was going on around you? How did you stay balanced? And what was one positive that came from it for you?
In all my athletic career, I adopted as an athlete and then as a coach and administrator. Control the things you can control. There's so many things that are outside your control.
Yes.
People worry about and lose sleep over. And we were all faced. It was the one ultimate time where all of us, everyone in this that lives on this earth, had to deal with COVID-19. And a lot of people handled it better than others. And the people who are a little bit more well-balanced, I think, had a better chance. And so I think in 3 different areas, I grew. I always equate any individual, and as I work to develop or coach, or that we're all like a tripod. We have three different legs that all need to be nurtured. A tripod is a really sturdy, because there's so many things that use the tripod theory behind it. And so, but each one of those legs, I think, are the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, which every person needs to be able to understand. And so, in the world that I've come from in athletics, I really do believe in the West, we do a fantastic job with the physical part, teaching someone how to run faster, how to catch a football, how to throw it, how to kick, how to do all those things. But I think we lack in the mental part. Now, we've gained in the mental part because people realize the mental part is as important as the physical part to be able to do things. But where the third area, and this is one of the things, and I'm not a preacher, but I live my life being spiritual. Everybody doesn't necessarily have to be religious, but I believe every one of us is spiritual, and so you still need to work on that part. So in these dark days, I had the opportunity to make sure that I worked on all three of those phases. Don't leave any one of them out, because how do you do it physically if you're self-contained and do all this? Well, you can do push-ups and sit-ups, but I'm very fortunate. I had 3 weights. You could also get out. I could get my cardio in. So I was able to take care of physical. The mental part is, you could start to read. A lot of people got into puzzles. We started puzzling a little bit. I'm Sudoku, crossword puzzles. You read. But I also know a lot of people got into television. Netflix all of a sudden became such a big thing. Is that how we're occupying our time? We have other ways we can do it. And then the other one is that, could say, well, the spiritual part. Well, I wasn't allowed to go to church. Well, everybody went online. And you don't have to go to church to be spiritual, to be religious. And so, for this past little bit of time, my wife's name is Sharon, and I'll mention Sharon probably a lot of times, is that we went to bed and there were so many things still left on our to-do list that we're thinking, people saying they were bored, and we're going, what are we missing? where is the bored part come in? And so I know a long answer to a very short question, but we can grow from there if you'd like. But it's been fulfilling. It's been the biggest challenge, though, is I'm a physical person. I miss the hugs. I miss handshakes. I miss the physical contact. And thank goodness I'm married to my best friend, Sharon. And I obviously get a lot of hugs, a lot of kisses, but it's still missing when I have 3 grown children and they have significant others and we have grandchildren. But the light at the end of the tunnel is coming, and it's not a train.
Coach, first, take as much time as you want to answer these questions, because your words are always so profound to me. And, you've always been a person of principle since the day that I met you. And one of the questions that I always wanted to ask you is, where does that come from, right? Because originally from Woodbridge, New Jersey, right? As I was doing a little research, I didn't know that your dad played for the Eagles, right? So what was that origin like growing up for you? And what were some of the things that your parents instilled in you that still spoke volume today for you?
I grew up in God's country. And some people say God forsaken, but no, New Jersey is a beautiful state. If you fly into Newark Airport, you see the oil refineries. It's known as the Garden State. And yes, I was very fortunate. My dad went to university. He played at the University of North Carolina. I happened to play at the University of North Carolina State. And so for 4 years, we didn't like each other, big rivalry. He was drafted by the Chicago Cardinals. And
that's a name you haven't heard of in a while.
No, exactly. And then played with the Philadelphia Eagles. I grew up in a football environment. And so, I remember Dad is a football coach. And so I grew up in that environment. And when I actually wanted to start playing football, he was hesitant. He didn't want me to. I guess he wanted to see if I really wanted to play. And so, yes, I did want to play, but I'm one of those kids as well as, whatever the season was, that's what we played. We did football, basketball, baseball. And then, in high school, I did football, wrestling, track and field.
You did everything. Wow.
Then in university, I actually was a wrestler. I was a heavyweight wrestler, and I also played football and at North Carolina State and had a scholarship. But my growing up was within athletics itself. My dad was 2 high schools he's only been at, and he was there, and he's no longer with us. Westside High School in Newark, New Jersey, and at Piscataway High School. He won a couple of state championships. But what I learned from my father is how to treat people.
Yes.
Man, he was a tough, hard-nosed coach. And I'm not as tough maybe and as hard-nosed as he was, because maybe he's a little more physical and the time allowed it. But boy, he cared.
Yes.
And he cared so much about the athlete. The athlete knew that if he's being chewed out, it was okay because he cared. And I grew up, and it's really interesting, and we'd probably be here for a long time. But I grew up in an environment that he had one athlete on his football team that was white. And so I grew up with all of these athletes, and I because he always took me, which was really neat. And I really remember looking at athletes and being able to tell an athlete by the size of their calves and how well defined they were. Because I mean, that's how small I was. I mean, I couldn't see any higher because Dad would be taping ankles and whatnot. And Dad tells a story that he had the one white athlete was a tight end on offense, and the mother came in to say that my dad was prejudiced because he plays all black athletes. He didn't play her son.
Yeah.
And then she said, "Well, you're not playing him because he's Italian." And he says, "Don't tell me that I'm prejudiced. My wife's Italian. I married an Italian." Yeah. And really what it was about. And so I always found that interesting. And then I had the opportunity to then start school, and within Woodbridge Township, which you did a good job of looking that up. And I went into a classroom, and so it was in kindergarten or first grade that I had to come and ask my dad. They said, I'm going to class with some black students. Who are they? And because black never resonated with me. I knew the color black, and then Dad sat me down and had to say, all of the athletes at Westside High School, they're all black. Mm-hmm. Most of them black, some are white, but I said, they're not black. It's brown. Is it really? And so know that Dad allowed me the opportunity to experience that. And coming on up in, you do get a lot of coaches say they're not racist. In the Black Life Movement, in BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how we're all the same. It boggles my mind. And so having had that opportunity and to grow up into that environment, but also what actually fuels you and makes you who you are is I had some very good high school coaches. Yeah. Both football, wrestling, and track and field. And again, you take things from every one of your experiences. And then I had the opportunity to go down to North Carolina State, and the head coach, his name was Lou Holtz. Now, Lou Holtz, and people might know him, is because he won a national championship at Notre Dame.
Yes.
And we helped him along the way because North Carolina State was his first stop in 4 years. Went to 4 bowl games, 4 years, and then he went on to New York Jets for a year, Arkansas, Minnesota, and then finally made it to Notre Dame. And he thought he had died and gone to heaven. He told his mom, "That's I already have gone to heaven. I'm at Notre Dame," and he excelled. But the experience down there also lent itself to who you become, because you're always being molded. You never arrive. You'll hear this, and I use this all the time, but it's true in everything we do. Either you get better or you get worse. Nothing ever remains the same. So today I have a chance to get better. Now, that's been used though with me at university, and I took it, but I also use it when I'm coaching athletes. And so even if I have a camp that I'm putting on, you have an opportunity each and every day to make a choice to get better. And so we have a football team, and I've had opportunity to be a head coach and general manager in the CFL, and same philosophy. If we're going to practice, let's make sure that we go out to get better. A lot of times people go through the motion. So where it all comes from, I'm blessed. Parents, family, mentors, who basically were coaches. That's who I am today, but I still grow. I still have growing to do. I still have learning to do. I'm going to learn, and I'll take something away from having the opportunity to have a conversation with you, and know that the lessons are to be learned in every spot. And so again, I have an opportunity today. Am I going to get better? I put my head down and, I'm grateful for everything that's happened in my life. And we live our life only one day at a time.
Coach, you said a lot there, man. A lot of really good things. And it's always so interesting. Growing up, we see things one way. We see things from our parents and mentors, and then that molds and shifts us. But when we get to a certain point and we reflect, we realize, that was a lesson there that we probably could grasp from. When you were in college, you just mentioned Lou Holtz. You spent time in high school with your dad coaching, but you've also seen him at the elite level as well, too. And football in America is a little different than football in Canada, especially in the NCAA season. What made you go to that school? Because I'm sure your dad was like, hey, man, just come over here and join this side. And when you were in college, what was that transition like, right? Because student athletes, the schedule is a little bit different everywhere. But how did you balance those times?
Very good questions. And the first one, why North Carolina State? I mean, growing up in New Jersey, and I was a linebacker, and I knew I still had to grow, and I was a pretty good linebacker. I got recruited by a couple of other ACC schools. I went and saw Wake Forest. I went down to Maryland. Penn State never came knocking, but that's okay. Yeah. I went down to North Carolina State, and something great was going to happen there. The Lou Holtz had the ability to make you think you could run through a wall, but he also surrounded himself with excellent coaches, and he started to create a culture that was a lot different than the other visits that I had. The other visits, you didn't feel that electricity. And so I always wanted to be following my dad's footsteps, and I always wanted to be a phys ed teacher, that if I were just to be in a high school, then I can be in phys ed, which complements being a coach, and I would probably have coached football, wrestling, track and field as well. And it actually didn't have a phys ed program. And all the others ones that I actually went to.
That's crazy.
And it is crazy. Why would you do that? And it was real simple. The lure to be there, to know that something great was happening, wanted to be part of. So it's really, my undergraduate degree is in vocational industrial education. I'm a school teacher that can open co-op programs that can get the high school athlete, or even university, that they get some job experience before they make the decision to go to university, or they're in university and then you can get them some hands-on job training, say, yeah, that's what I want to be. And then you realize that's not what you wanted to be. But I had an education degree so that I could teach in the vocational field. So then I started my professional odyssey, and I went to the University of Virginia and worked on a master's in adaptive physical education. So I got my degree after
got
the
it.
4 years
One
to,
way
to
or
be
another.
able to have that option because, again, I was like anybody else that goes to major college, that I actually ended up being a defensive nose guard. I was an All-American. I was an All-American heavyweight wrestler. I know I don't look that big any longer, but I now look like a kicker or a defensive back. But I wanted to play in the NFL, and I wanted to play for 10 years. That was just one of the things that I set my mind out to, and that didn't happen. But I played for the Buffalo Bills. I played for Saskatchewan Roughriders. I played for the Calgary Stampeders, and I have no regrets, none whatsoever. But going there was so critically important. And then another part of the question was, you're a student athlete. And again, that was so well stressed down there that I didn't want to go just so I could be a professional football player and just take classes that allow me to stay eligible. I got my degree in 4 years without going to summer school. I got my degree with being a football player and a wrestler. How that happens is a whole nother story.
Wait, so you did both
Yes.
at the same time?
Yes.
Man, how, Coach? That's
You're gonna have to come back on some of the questions, but in North Carolina universities, you cannot graduate unless you can swim. So you had to take the Phys Ed 101 course. Everybody did. And you had to be able to swim. Otherwise, you had to take swimming lessons. So it was just something in the state that, to me, is really critical. Because you know what, you don't want to have people that don't know how to swim, because there's a possibility at some point in your life you might be in water and you'd like to be able to swim. So the first day of Phys Ed 101, the gym teacher said, okay, you're going to have to jump in the water, tread water for 2 minutes, and then you have to do 2 laps. But he said, before you go in, hold on a second. He went and got the big hook off of the side wall.
yeah.
I looked at him and I said, why? What are you doing? He goes, watch. Jump in. Sure enough, people couldn't swim. They jumped in. He had to take them out of the water with the hook.
Okay.
And you think, really? Somebody would jump into the water? Because they know that they now have to take a swimming course if they couldn't. But that guy who was the instructor was the head wrestling coach.
Oh, okay.
So
makes sense.
So what happened is a good coach is not going to pass up an opportunity. And so he knew I was a football player. And I happened to be on a stationary bike, and I'm not really quite sure what we were doing at that time. But as the coach came on by, now I'm starting to be introduced to him. It's Coach Daniels. And he came by and he said, have you ever wrestled before? Because now you got to remember, I'm a lot bigger than I was that you're looking at. And I said, oh, yes, I wrestled. And he left me alone. I kept cycling. He comes back, were you any good? I said, yes. And he left me alone. He goes, came back around. And again, now he's circling and he's thinking, okay, this is like a vulture, right? Coming back to his prey. What was your record? I think it was 23-1. I lost one match in a regional final in overtime. We tied in overtime. So you wrestle 2 3-minute periods. And so I'm wrestling in the tournament to go to the state championship. And we tied in regulation. We tied in overtime. And there's 2 mat officials and the referee, and they stand up who they want. And it was a split decision. They picked the bigger guy. And so
the bigger guy always wins.
I don't know. I don't know if that's why I did it. But he said, would you like to wrestle? I had never thought about it. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm a student first. Football's the priority. And so I go to Coach Holtz, and I sit down and have a discussion with him. Would you be okay if I wrestled? And he said, yes, under one condition. Your grades don't suffer.
Mm.
And it's not a problem. I wrestled for 4 years, lettered for 4 years, went to the nationals twice. And in my senior year, I ended up wrestling and winning enough matches that I was considered an All-Canadian in wrestling. And then I was an All-Canadian at nose guard. And so, draft came around. No one wanted me in the NFL. CFL did. And so I ended up going to CFL. So now a lot has happened in all that question and that long, drawn-out answer. But again, I was impacted by Coach Daniels as much as I was by Coach Holtz or my position coach, because I'm really blessed because the mental discipline that it takes to do an individual sport compared to a team sport is a lot different.
Yes.
You go out on the mat, it's only you and the other man. No ifs, ands, or buts. Either you're going to win or he wins. But I also have a different philosophy in what actually takes to be a winner. And this has stayed with me, and even to this day, even with me going up and coach at the University of Alberta, the Golden Bear football team, if you played to the best of your ability, or if you wrestled to the best of your ability, you won. Doesn't matter what the score is. Doesn't matter what the match is. You can't have done any better. And so that has served me really well. Where that came from, one of the mentors, I'm not sure where it came from, but now it's part of the fabric in me. And so any athletes that I've had the opportunity to coach, they hear these things all the time. And I do know that they have come back to me because now they have kids and I get to coach their kids, and their kids are having kids, and you're just thinking, oh, it goes on. So, I mean, again, your legacy is that how many people you can influence in a very positive way. And that's one of the real treats that I have, why I love coaching. And I'm going to coach until the day they tell me I can't do it any longer.
Before we cross over to your coaching aspect of things, Coach, 1979, you got to play in the NFL. What was some of the highlight of that year? Because you didn't get drafted, but you got there. Because 1979, man, as I was doing some research about some of the players who were playing that year, you have guys like Roger Staubach, you have Walter Payton, Earl Campbell, who I think won MVP that year. Man, these are some names that paved the way for people who we see now. What was that year like for you? And did you like what was a moment where you said, okay, these guys are for real?
Here's what's fascinating is, so I was with the Buffalo Bills 1 year after O.J. Simpson left. So he was finishing up his career, and he finished up with the San Francisco 49ers, but he was really known as a Buffalo Bill.
Yes, absolutely.
Two of the offensive linemen that blocked for O.J. Simpson was Joe DeLamalure and Reggie McKenzie. I can remember it like it was yesterday. What people would be shocked at is their weight. Reggie McKenzie weighed 265. Joe DeLamalure weighed 270. At that time, we didn't have any 300-pounders, but we had a lot of gifted athletes. And at that time too, the average salary was almost $80,000.
Oh man!
The average salary, and again, the players at that time were only making 5% of all revenues generated, and it wasn't until they finally realized that they had to tie the 55% into their salaries of all the money that was being made down south. But really, what was mind-boggling, who was the best player that I had the opportunity to see and play against? Obviously, I didn't play. I was on the field, but we were playing Chicago Bears. And if you ever looked up Walter Payton, you are going to see so many pictures of him 7 foot in the air going over top of defensive players.
Sweetness,
So
right?
we had them. We were at home, and sure enough, they were on the goal line. And what happened is, again, you gave it to Walter Payton. We had our linebackers coming here, but Walter Payton was going over the top of them because he was just that athletic. He was just that strong. He was just that good. That's an easy picture, obviously, to be taken. But one of the finest players that gifted. And when you get to that level, they're all gifted.
Yes.
And, to have been there was really a treat. And again, I was hoping to put 10 years in. I was only qualified with 4 years as a professional football player, but life goes on. I again, you'll always hear it. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. There's no way that I was going to put all my eggs in one basket of being a professional football player. But at that period of time, if you made it to the NFL, you're working afterwards.
Absolutely.
Nowadays, if you make it into the NFL, I think the minimum salary is $500,000. So if you're an unrestricted free agent, you're $500,000. You don't even have to negotiate. And you're just thinking, man, that's a lot of money. But again, the average life expectancy of a professional football player is under 4 years. We get to see all the guys that have all this longevity. There are quite a few of them, the Tom Brady's of the world, and some receivers, but some offensive linemen, defensive linemen, running backs. Boy, those guys should get paid more than almost anybody else because you hand them the football and you've got all these guys trying to decapitate you. Trying to end your career. And so a lot of fun. Thank you for asking. And it's fun to actually look back and think about. You were in the show.
Yeah.
You know what? The show is only the show. It's like, you've been in the Olympics. You're going, is it a big thing? Yeah. Every 4 years, people turn on. You know what? You spend your whole career to get this one opportunity. And yes, it is a big show. But when you get there, you go, I arrived. Is this all there is? So if you don't understand, it's the journey. It's not the destination. It's to enjoy the fact that you're going to work your butt off because I want to make sure that I can make the team and so that I can possibly play and so that I have a chance to go. And so, again, that's just you get all this from my upbringing and the mentors and the people who've had the opportunity to make me who I am.
It's funny you say that because I remember getting to when we're about to get the medal at the Olympics and we were standing on the podium and, everybody's facial expression is a little bit different. But what was going through my mind was the fact of, yes, I was happy in the moment, but I was thinking about all of the people who helped me get to where I was today, right? Maya Angelou has a quote that says, I come as one, but I stand with 10,000. So I was thinking about every single person who helped me get to this point today, not just on the track, but, to my academic advisors who helped me, finish school, to my high school teachers who would meet me early in the morning to go over certain things. And it's definitely so profound how you said that, because oftentimes it's those small cliche things that actually are the real truth. And so, Coach, I want to shift to your coaching career, because as I was looking at some of the stuff, man, you retired in 1980. You started coaching in 1982. You became a head coach officially in 2001. So that's 19 years that it took you to get to that point. And I started to think, that must have been seasons of patience, diligence, consistency, and so many different things. Because I'm sure there were some moments where in the positions that you had that you said, man, I would do things a little bit differently. So I want to ask, Coach, what was that 19-year span like as you were getting ready for an opportunity that you didn't know when was going to come, but you had hope it did? So just walk me through a little bit of that, because you are a way more patient man than I was, and I would have been.
Well, thank you for that. But you know what? I wouldn't have been able to tell you how many years it was, because I'm a very content person. My wife and I both realized that at some point in time, I said, you know what, that's enough. I tried to be a professional football player, and you need to be at the right spot at the right time. You need to be good, but you also need to be lucky. And so there's so many things that go into it that I appreciated and understood. So we came back to Calgary. So what you need to know is that when I left North Carolina State, the Calgary Stampeders wanted me.
Yes.
And I had some free agent opportunities in the NFL, but it seemed like they wanted me, and that's what I needed to know that I could possibly get a chance. But I didn't realize when I came up that there was a ratio. And so we had, I think, upward to 15 linebackers in camp. And I think 10 of them were Americans and 5 were Canadian. And we were going to keep 3 Canadians and 1 American. And I'm thinking, okay. But I was able to beat the odds, and I was able to play. And that's where I met my wife. And 4 years later, we got married. And so she became a player's wife, and then assistant coach's wife, and then assistant GM, then a GM wife, and then head coach GM wife. But during this period of time, I'm a very content person, driven. But I came home. We came back to Calgary, set Calgary up as home. There's opportunities for my wife and I were both teachers by trade. I got a teaching job before she did, and she was a teacher before we got married. And so that's one notch that I hold over her. That, yeah, I beat you getting the job.
Yes,
and
sir.
so
Yes, sir.
I was at Jack James, the secondary vocational school, which made a lot of sense. Got hired right away, former football player, with the Calgary Stampeders. I think all that lent itself to that as a possibility. And I remember going to the principal at Jack James and said, "Hey, do we have a football team?" And he goes, "No, we're a vocational high school." I said, "Oh, I think I need to have do you know of any place where I can coach?" And he goes, "I know they're looking for a coach at Crescent Heights High School." And so
that's my alma mater.
so I went to Crescent Heights and coached for a year, but then I got caught on. Peter Kennellan was the head coach at University of Calgary. And then 3 years I had the opportunity to still stay as a teacher, but then to go over to university. I'm living my dream. You realize the first time that I got a job as a teacher, that's my dream. I also knew I was going to coach. I started the first wrestling program for Jack James. Vocational secondary high school, well, it's an individual sport. All we need is a mat. And we got ourselves a mat, and we ran some tournaments, and we had some pretty good wrestlers. But then, I had the opportunity that I was with the University of Calgary, which again, now, hey, it's a dream. Look at me.
Yeah.
I am now moving on up the ranks.
Yes.
But still as an assistant. And the new head coach of the Calgary Stampeders was a coach when I finished my professional career with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Ron Lancaster was a head coach, but Steve Barato was an assistant at that time. He became the head coach in Calgary. So now all of a sudden there's an in. So I worked for Coach Barato for a whole summer before I went back to university. And my whole goal on this one is work so hard that he misses me when I leave.
That's good. That's good.
And it sure was, because I was offered a job. And so now I get to spend 9 years with the Calgary Stampeders. And I'm realizing, boy, this is pretty good that I can hang on to my job, because I coached linebackers, I coached the secondary, I made sure I cleaned the bathrooms, and I knew where the keys were, because there were 5 different head coaches over that short period of time that I was there. And the one last time that before I left Calgary is I had the opportunity to hire Wally Warno as a defensive line coach. I was a linebacker coach.
Wow.
And so we coached together. And then all of a sudden there was an opening, and they were going to hire from within. And it was Wally and I that were competing against one another for the head coaching job. They selected Wally. So now I became the assistant head coach, which was really nice because there's a lot of things that I could do. And again, I did it knowing that there's an ultimate goal in mind. If you coach special teams, you're coaching all of the players except some of the offensive linemen and the quarterbacks. So I thought that being the special teams coordinator was really good for me to know when I possibly get that opportunity. And so now Wally's having a lot of success. We're having a lot of success. 1991, we went to the Grey Cup. We lost. 1992, we won the Grey Cup against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. 1993 was the best year, maybe the best football team the Calgary Stampeders ever had. We lost to the Edmonton Eskimos in the Western Finals because it was minus 40 degrees. Doug doesn't work very well with his small hands. He froze up. They did what they had to do. We lost in 93. The next week, the game was in Calgary, and there was a Chinook that came in. Edmonton played the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and won. And so now all of a sudden, there were, inkling that I was in line because I served really well for 9 years. I actually had an interview with Hugh Campbell about getting a head coaching job, but he gave it to Ron Lancaster, which was fine. All of a sudden, I get a call from Hugh Campbell, who's the general manager. He was a football, head football coach there, won 5 Grey Cups in a row. And he knew me because he interviewed me for the head coaching job. He had an assistant GM job open up. And he called me and said, would you like to come up to Edmonton? And at that time, the Edmonton Eskimos, EE, was the evil empire, the 2 letters.
Yeah.
And it's just because they were always in the playoffs. They were always so very good. One of the things that I was smart enough to realize, Wally wasn't leaving. So we left. We had 3 young children, Sharon and I. Interesting story before we left, when we told our children that we're going to go to Edmonton and coach, would be the assistant GM for the Edmonton Eskimos. Our son is our youngest and said, Dad, we can't go to Edmonton. We hate the Edmonton Eskimos.
He was invested.
The answer was not anymore. So we went up and ended up spending 11 football seasons. But I went up there and helped Ron Lancaster. We had continued to have success. We had other coaches. Again, I'm doing my job. And again, time's irrelevant, but something's going to eventually, I'll knock and the door will get open. We had Don Matthews, who was really struggling for whatever reason. And the coaches were struggling. And this is in training camp. And I had to talk with Hugh Campbell a lot that the coaches, the assistant coaches are really struggling under Don for whatever reason. He's had a lot of success, but right now the coaches aren't happy. They're almost ready to boycott,
Wow.
Whether they're going to even coach or not. And so a tough decision had to be made. Hugh Campbell let Don Matthews go. And in training camp. So you got to understand, we're already set,
Yeah.
And so we had a discussion. Hugh Campbell and I were sitting down in the room together, and he goes, well, I guess I've already coached. I guess it's your turn. And so, I always thought, okay, we're going to have, when I get the opportunity to be the head coach, I'm hoping that all of my family members would be there. My wife would be there. We'd have balloons and celebration. The press conference was, Hugh Campbell and I were sitting at the table. We're talking that, we let Don Matthews go. And again, he wasn't going to give out any kind of additional information, but had to go. Players were there. They're crying. And by the way, Tom's your head coach. That was it. It was like, not what I had in mind, but that gave me my first opportunity. And so time flies when you're having fun. Sharon said for me not to use this anymore. I would do this for free. And she said, don't tell anybody because they will probably say, okay, you can do it for free. you do need to take home some money so you can pay the mortgage and put some food on the table. But that was never the case, because I always found the challenge. I always found the positivity, and I always found the strength to it. And so then, after 11 football seasons in Edmonton, 4 years as a GM and head coach, we went to, we finished in first 3 times, second once, 2 Grey Cup appearances, won a Grey Cup, and was a coach of the year. And they let me go. I say because of illness and fatigue, they got sick and tired of me. And so, you only have a certain shelf life, and then you move on. And then I came down to Calgary. But I just want you to know, we're talking about 19 years. It flew by. It was amazing, because I feel sorry for people who are not happy in what they're doing. Then you're working for a living. I never worked a day in my life. And so when people say, are you retired? I said, no, I can't retire because I've never worked. And they look at me strange, and they go, you don't know me very well. If when you get a chance to know me, you realize, yeah, you are crazy, like people say, but I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
Do what you love. And I have. And I loved every bit. And it was all part of the journey. And the beautiful thing, that the journey's not over.
Oh, absolutely not. There's still more to go.
Oh, yes, exactly. And to be back out on the field. And again, the pandemic has caused the opportunity that I was given last year to coach the University of Alberta Golden Bears. I coached them, but we never had any football games. So it's nice to practice and to do all the little things. But you're rewarded by being able to go on out and, challenge another team. So hopefully that's going to happen this year. And I really do believe that that's in the horizon, because where we're at right now in the time that we are in Canada and the United States, with us catching up to the vaccines and numbers going down, that there will be a football season.
Coach, last couple questions here. The scripture says, too much is given, much is required. 2003, you won the Grey Cup, and you had various stints as a head coach. But we all know that does not come without its ups and downs. I want to ask, Coach, and this is a loaded question, what are some intangible things that it takes to be a good leader? One, also, how do you get a team to come together? There's so many different personalities, right? You have Americans coming up, Canadians coming up, people from overseas. There's so many different people, and you're trying to get a team to mesh together for one common goal. But that's not easy to do, right? So how did you do that? And how did you find balance, right? Because, you're coaching here. Sharon says, hey, I need you to be home at this time, right? How do you handle those intangible things as a head coach?
Okay, first, it's a couple of questions in there. As even on the university level, you get the opportunity to start helping mold an athlete, because they're still very moldable from high school to university. And so you want to create a culture. And one of the reasons, again, to go from Calgary to Edmonton is, what was it? What do they have that was different, that made them truly unique? And really what it was just the fact that when an athlete comes into the organization, when they leave, they're going to be a better person for having been part of the organization, because of the culture that's created, the mindset that it's about giving back. The mindset is about leave your ego at the door. It's more important about your teammate, to help them rise to be better. And so when you get and create that kind of culture, you have yourself a chance to be successful. Now, again, success sometimes in the world, it's based on wins and losses of, on the scoreboard, not necessarily in your heart and doing what we talked about that, if you do your best, then, you're a winner.
Yeah.
So it really, the culture comes on in. Now, in a professional organization, you get to pick and choose who you have on your team and who you don't have on your team. And so it's very important that in the selection process, whether you're drafting or whether you're signing an American to come on up, what makes them tick? They could be the best football player, but they don't fit the criteria of what we want as far as a citizen's concerned. Are they willing to give back to the community? The number of hours that the football players give in the CFL, but in Edmonton at that point in time, was ridiculous. And in a good way, because they realize how fortunate they are. One of the things that I really love about professional football players, but pretty much the CFL football player, is they're grounded. There is no multi-million-dollar contracts that these men know that, for whatever reason, it's that mentality is very important. But then again, you're still working to make sure that there's so many things. You can take a flyer on it, single athlete, because your team is made up of 50 odd players or more.
Yeah.
That, here's what happens is usually the athlete will fall in line, but you still have an opportunity to help grow that athlete. Yeah. And some people would not agree with me. No, you when the athlete comes to a professional organization, they're already set in their ways. I don't believe that for a moment. I truly believe that they can still be molded and moved in a direction. And if you can't, then your association with them is not going to be there that long. And again, it's still always a very short period of time, because it's very difficult to have a real long career, because you can only imagine now in 11 football seasons that I had in Edmonton, there's a lot of athletes. I was actually down in Las Vegas, and there was a big looking athlete that came by me, and he said, "Coach Higgins." And the first thing he said, "You cut me." And I said, "Oh, well, it's good to see you too." And that's an occupational challenge that you have, that the moment that you come to a professional organization, you're not guaranteed anything. You have to work, and then you make some decisions. And to think that only one person let someone go, yes, I might have been the one who told them, but we as an organization decided that, it's time that we had to move on. And a lot of times you move on for so many different reasons. It can be the fact that, you've been here for so long, now you're making this amount of money. We got somebody who's coming in that's younger, that's going to make a lot less money, but it can play at the same level that you're playing. So that's when you start making changes. But, athletes find it very difficult to see that. They only see themselves. They don't see a full picture. And, there's different reactions that happen when you let an athlete go. And so I'll tell you just another little story, and it's a side story that comes with this, is that I'm a GM and head coach of the Calgary Stampeders after 11 football seasons in Edmonton. And Sharon happened to be in the office, my office, where, usually there's a little boardroom table because we have meetings, and the coaching staff can come on in. So it's usually the biggest office in the area, which makes sense because you're bringing athletes in and you're sitting them down and you're telling them that they can no longer be a Calgary Stampeder. And so my wife just asked a question. He goes, "Well, what's the reaction of some of the athletes?" And I said, "Well, I was cut 6 times as a professional athlete. I think I had a lot of experience at it.
Yes.
I can tell you the right ways and the wrong ways. And the right way is just to be honest with a young man and tell him directly, we brought you up thinking that, if this just is not the right fit for you. We don't have a spot for you. We appreciate your effort. I thank you for that. Is there something that I can do?" Some of them might break down and start crying. And she goes, "Well, what do you do?" And so I had a roll of toilet paper. It's just hidden behind, I think, a photo that I had, and I would hand it to her. She was appalled. How can you hand them toilet paper? That's insult. And so she was offended that I had, and so the next day I had a box of
Kleenex, yes.
and I go, I'm not sure that they care whether it's Kleenex or toilet paper to wipe their eyes, right?
Yeah.
And so that happens. But balance. You asked about balance. Thank goodness Sharon had the opportunity to be on both sides to understand. If you asked our 3 grown children who raised them, their mother did. In football season, it's all time consuming. I am blessed to have such a great wife that she knew the priorities. But with all that being said, we made the best out of most situations. So I first go up to Edmonton. I'm the assistant GM. And when the NFL starts their training camps, we're about halfway through. And I was also helping run Commonwealth Stadium. That was one of my responsibilities, as well as bringing athletes in. So I went to NFL training camps. So I was away for 2 weeks. I came back and flew for a home game and then went back on out. And so, I mean, I was away from the family in the summer for over 4 weeks. And they're in the summer vacation. So creatively, and, you know, Hugh Campbell is all about family as well. I said, you know what? Instead of flying, would you allow me the opportunity to drive? He said, what do you have in mind? I said, I want to take my family. So we ended up having family vacations. They think they were vacationing. I was working. We were driving to Wisconsin. It was known as the Cheese League. They have all these teams that played there, so you can get to see 4 different NFL teams. I fly into New York City, and you have the Jets, the Giants, and you have the Eagles, and you also have the Patriots. And so our kids now, to create a balance, their summer vacation was being in a van and driving to Wisconsin or the East Coast, and we had a great time at it. They, you know, each place that we stopped would have a swimming pool, and they entertained themselves, and we made it work. And so I'm blessed in that respect. In this profession, the divorce rate is very high because you're not in any one place for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And so know that my time with the Calgary Stampeders was a very short period of time. I turned over the reins to John Huffnagel, who's still there today. And I'm very proud of the fact that when I left the Edmonton Eskimos, the next year they won the Grey Cup. When I left the Calgary Stampeders, the next year they won the Grey Cup. And what I like to think is I had a little bit to play in that the shelves were full. And so for me, I'm very proud of that. And so now we came back to Calgary. Our 2 girls graduated from the University of Alberta. Our son started at the University of Alberta, then went to the University of Calgary. We came back and so know that now if you get in the time period, they're now at the time where they're graduated university, finishing up university. We're now living back in Calgary, and 3 years with the Stampeders, and I'm no longer employed. And Sharon had this vision that, you know, she'll be able to be an empty nester, you know, over a 3-year period of time, maybe 4. One leaves, and then, you know, you have 2, and you get an opportunity to, you know, get back into the field, only having 2 children, grown children, and then another one leaves. And what happened was the league office called. And they asked if I would be the director of officiating. Yes. And to be director of officiating, they wanted me to be in Toronto. And so we had a family meeting. So now you understand my son, he's sharp. We said, well, what do you guys think? Son said, Dad, I don't see any other job offers. You're going.
Wow.
That's how the decision was made that, okay, we're going to go. So we became empty nesters within a matter of weeks because
Wow.
we went to Toronto. And again, my attitude was, okay, new adventure. Now for Sharon and I. And it really did become an adventure. And so I did that for 6 years. And again, but the balance is created because, again, mental, physical, and spiritual. We all had the opportunity to go to church together, that we understood that these are the things that Dad sacrifices. But on the other side, I had the opportunity to coach my son in football and wrestling, coached my daughters in basketball. I was able to, put things aside and create that balance. And, that has served us very well to this day.
Yeah, I think you do a good job of that, because that's one of the things that, just from a young age for me, I've always said, I want to, when you're pursuing this elite level, especially when you're at an elite level, there is a certain sacrifice and a price that you have to pay. And if you want to get to a certain level, you have to pay full price. You can't pay half price. It just doesn't work like that. And so for me, I've always tried my best to make sure that I give enough, but I do my best not to neglect. And so it's always that big shift of, for me, even when I think I'm doing well, I'm always like, am I handling it well? And I'm just like, I don't know until I really get out of it. But I think that's just one of the questions that I always like to ask people, because it's tough, right? It's not an easy thing to do. But also, before we get into these last fun 5 questions, when your son said, hey, you don't have any other option there to go, but the family meeting aspect of it, Coach, man, I think that's such a beautiful thing, because this has been such a big part of your life, and they know that, right? And I think, just from my perspective of it, that's a huge sign of respect that they have for you, right? For them to not even think twice and say, no, you're going, right? I think that right there is a testament to that balance right there. Last 5, Coach. Shouldn't be too hard, shouldn't be too taxing. It should be pretty easy. Question 1. If you were trapped on a deserted island for a week, you could only bring 3 things. What would those 3 things be?
Well, I bring my wife with me, and you know what? So that's so that way we can stay in shape together, and we can, you have to bring enough food and then water, and so it's so boring but practical, and so we can enjoy ourselves.
Question 2. You have a coffee gathering. You can have 5 people, past or present. Who is sitting at the table and you're having a conversation with? 5 people, not including yourself.
Okay, so I don't drink coffee, so can it be tea? So
Tea, absolutely. Tea, water, lemonade, sweet tea.
I think Dad has to come on back, and so there's a lot of things that, and it's really important, and I have to share this, is that Lou Holtz, we went to 4 bowl games in 4 years. Lou Holtz, we would go home for Christmas, and it would only be for a couple of days, because then we had to be back on campus to go to play in the bowl game. He got us all together as a full team, and he says, hey, I got the best gift that you can give your parents, and it didn't cost you a penny. He said, go home and tell them that you love them. Wow. And I knew I came from a loving family, but we never used that word. But that Christmas, I used the word, I loved you. I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad. And so every time that we came and left each other, I had the opportunity to say that. And I'll share it with athletes at the appropriate time, because you don't realize how much you love your mom or dad love you until you have children of your own. You'll give your own life for your own children. And so that happened. And so I would like to again have the opportunity to say I love you, but know that there's no regrets there, because there was never a time when I didn't have that chance to say. So mom gets to be there. And I think I'm going to have my football and wrestling coach from university, Coach Daniels and then Coach Holtz. They both need to be there. So I'm at 3. My defensive line coach was the meanest, nastiest guy you could ever imagine. He has to be at the table. And then I think what I would do is I'd have one player that I played with at university. He needs to jump in because he'd be the life of the party. He'd keep things moving, and that would be Dan Meyer. So those are my guys right off the top. And but in a very sports oriented, if you give me a whole nother 5 from another field, I can go there without a problem. But I know these are supposed to be quick, but I had to tell you the story.
Oh, that was a great story. No, that's very
Coach Holtz.
That's very powerful, Coach. Question 3. You've had a long stint coaching, and you're still coaching at University of Alberta. If there was one advice that you would give to an up and coming coach who wants to, be at the level where you're at, coaching at the CFL, they got, ability to go to the Grey Cup and learning under all these great people. What is one advice that you would give to them that is a word of encouragement for them on their journey?
The first thing that any coach has to do is be themselves, because one of the biggest challenges that they've had so many different examples of coaches that they want to try to be like, but you have to be yourself, and then put the work in and be patient. I know that's a bunch of things, but they're all blend together, because if you do the work and you're patient and you are yourself, the sky's the limit if you're willing to do what's necessary.
Great. Question 4. What is one thing that you have to do for yourself every day?
Have a conversation with myself. This is the first day of the rest of my life. This is the beginning of the new day, and God has given me days this day to use as I will. And what I do today is important because I'm exchanging the day of my life for it. When tomorrow comes, this day will be gone forever, leaving in its place that which I have traded. I want it to be gain, not loss, good, not evil, success, not failure. In order, I shall not regret the price that I paid for it, because the future is just a whole string of nows. I will try just for today, because you never fail until you stop trying. Choices, not chance, determines destiny. Time with myself, and saying that each and every day, because today's a new day.
I'm going to have to re-listen to this and make sure I get all that word for word. That's powerful. Last question, Coach. You've shared with me some stories that I've never heard of before from you. And so it was very nice to hear, but also the journey that got you where you are. Everything that you've been able to accomplish, Coach, everything that you had to overcome, everything you had to sacrifice, the patience that it took to become a coach and to become a head coach and to win a Grey Cup in this journey of things. If there was one word to describe you, what would that one word be, and why?
Honest. I like to think that I would be honest with you, but I'm honest with myself, and I'll leave it at that.
Coach, it's been a pleasure. And what's interesting is we were talking about the pandemic and the kids, and not always being able to see their face. Well, I'm hoping that this episode brings them the full package to get to know you, the person that they see. And when the games start, it'll maybe bring them a little bit closer, because I'm sure that they don't know that you've been to the level where they aspire to be, and sometimes in a place of comfortability, we often don't know who's in the room, but if we remember who's in the room, we can say, they have a story too. And you'd be surprised what would happen if people just ask the right questions.
We need to converse with one another, and like you opened up, we have a lot in common.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Coach, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Anytime.